Evelyn had stopped believing in safe places. But when the bus dropped her at the edge of the forgotten village, she thought maybe this broken place could hide her broken heart. The driver looked at her like she was crazy. "Lady, nobody lives here anymore. You sure about this?" She nodded and stepped off the bus with her old brown suitcase. The suitcase was light. She didn't bring much. When your husband dies and the world feels too loud and too bright, you don't need many things. You just need quiet. The village was quiet. Too quiet. Empty houses lined the dirt road like old teeth in a dying mouth. Windows were shattered. Doors hung crooked on rusty hinges. Weeds grew tall as children through cracks in the stone paths. The forest pressed close on all sides, dark and watching. Most people would turn around. Most people would run. But Evelyn walked forward. Her shoes crunched on gravel. The sound was the only sound in the world. She found the house at the end of the road. It was the most broken of all. The roof sagged in the middle like a sad smile. The walls had cracks running through them like lightning frozen in stone. The front door was missing completely. "Perfect," Evelyn whispered. Inside, dust covered everything like a gray blanket. Cobwebs hung in the corners. A small kitchen sat to the left with a rusty stove. A bedroom was to the right with a broken bed frame. In the middle was a room with a fireplace and one wooden chair. Evelyn set down her suitcase. From inside, she pulled out her husband's coat. It still smelled like him. Pine trees and morning coffee and safety. She wrapped it around her shoulders even though it was too big. For the first time in months, she sat down. The silence wrapped around her. It felt like a hug. A cold hug, but still a hug. She didn't cry. She had no tears left. When David died, she cried so much she thought she might dry up and blow away like dust. But she didn't. She just became empty. A shell. A widow with nothing inside. That's why she came here. To this village where no one wanted to live. To this house that no one wanted to fix. She came here to disappear. Night fell fast in the forgotten village. Evelyn lit a small lantern she had brought. The flame danced and threw shadows on the cracked walls. The shadows looked like people watching her. She didn't mind. Real people were harder to face than shadow people. She heated a can of soup on the old stove, which somehow still worked. The soup was thin and tasteless, but she ate it. She wasn't hungry, but she knew she needed to eat. Then she sat in the wooden chair by the fireplace and stared at nothing. The wind picked up outside. It whistled through broken windows and the missing door. The house creaked and groaned like an old man with sore bones. The forest rustled and whispered. Evelyn pulled David's coat tighter. That's when she heard it. At first, she thought it was the wind, a low, sad sound drifting through the darkness. But then she listened closer. Her heart began to beat faster. It wasn't the wind. It was crying. Someone was crying. The sound was faint and far away, but it was definitely crying. A sobbing, heartbroken sound that made Evelyn's chest ache. It sounded human. But who could be crying out here? The village was empty. The bus driver said nobody lived here anymore. Evelyn stood up slowly. Her legs felt shaky. She walked to the empty doorway and looked out into the night. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The darkness was thick and heavy. She could barely see the road in front of her house. The forest beyond was a wall of black. The crying continued. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello," Evelyn called out. Her voice sounded small and scared. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped. The silence that followed was worse than crying. It pressed down on Evelyn like a heavy hand. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear in her ears. She waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Nothing. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe grief was making her hear things that weren't there. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her in this strange, broken place. Evelyn went back inside. She wrapped herself in David's coat and lay down on the cold floor. She didn't have a bed yet. She didn't have blankets. But she had survived worse than a cold floor. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the crying came back. This time it was closer, louder, more desperate. It sounded like a child crying in the darkness. Lost, alone, terrified. Evelyn's eyes snapped open. Her whole body went cold. This was real. This was not her imagination. Someone was out there. Someone needed help. But fear held her down like chains. She had come here to hide from the world, to be alone with her grief, to let the silence swallow her up. She didn't want to face whatever was making that sound. The crying grew louder, more insistent. It tugged at something deep inside Evelyn. Something she thought had died when David died. Her heart. It was starting to beat again, not with fear, with something else. Something that felt almost like caring. No, she whispered to herself. I can't care anymore. It hurts too much. But the crying didn't stop. It begged. It pleaded. It called to her through the darkness like a hand reaching out for rescue. Evelyn sat up. She grabbed her lantern. Her hands were shaking. She didn't want to go out there. She didn't want to face whatever was waiting in the shadows. But something stronger than fear was moving her feet. Maybe it was the memory of being loved. Maybe it was the ghost of the person she used to be before grief hollowed her out. Or maybe it was something simpler. Maybe it was the sound of another broken heart calling to hers. Evelyn walked to the doorway. She held up her lantern. The small flame pushed back the darkness just a little. I'm coming, she whispered into the night. And the crying, just for a moment, seemed to quiet, as if something out there had heard her, as if something out there was waiting. Evelyn stepped out into the darkness with her lantern held high. The small flame was brave, but the night was braver. Shadows danced and stretched around her like living things. The crying had stopped again, but now Evelyn could feel it. A pull, like a string tied around her heart, tugging her forward. She walked down the broken road. Her footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Every house she passed was dark and dead. No lights, no life, just hollow buildings with empty eyes. Hello, she called again. Her voice bounced off the walls and disappeared into the forest. Were you? Nothing answered, but the pull got stronger. She walked faster. The road ended at a small square in the center of the village. In the middle of the square stood an old stone well. It was ancient and crumbling. The wooden roof over it had collapsed long ago. Weeds grew up through the cracks in the stones. Evelyn stopped. The pull led her here. To this well. She held her lantern over the edge and looked down. The darkness inside was absolute. She couldn't see the bottom. The well seemed to go down forever, swallowing her light like a hungry mouth. Hello, she whispered into the darkness. And from deep, deep below, she heard it. A small voice. A child's voice. Help. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Her hands gripped the edge of the well, so hard her knuckles turned white. Who's there? She called down. Are you hurt? Help me, the voice said again. It was weak, tired, like someone who had been crying for a very long time. Evelyn's mind raced. How did a child get down there? How long had they been trapped? Why hadn't anyone heard them before? But then she remembered. Nobody lived here anymore. Nobody came to this village. Nobody listened. Except her. Hold on, Evelyn shouted. I'm going to get you out. But how? She looked around desperately. There was no rope, no ladder, nothing but broken stones and dead weeds. She ran back to her house as fast as she could. Her lantern swung wildly, making the shadows jump and twist. She burst through the doorway and searched frantically. In the corner of the bedroom, she found old curtains hanging in tatters. She ripped them down and tied them together with shaking hands. They made a long, thin rope. It would have to be enough. She ran back to the well. I'm here, she called down. I have a rope. Can you catch it? Silence. Then quietly, yes. Evelyn tied one end of the curtain rope to a strong iron ring on the side of the well. She threw the other end down into the darkness. It disappeared into the black. Do you have it? She called. Yes, came the small voice. Hold on tight. I'm going to pull you up. Evelyn grabbed the rope and pulled. It was heavier than she expected. The child must be exhausted. Or maybe something else was down there too. She pushed the thought away and pulled harder. Her arms burned. Her back ached. Sweat dripped down her face, even though the night was cold. Hand over hand. Pull, pull, pull. The rope moved slowly upward, inch by inch. Keep holding on. Evelyn gasped. Almost there. Her muscles screamed. Her hands were raw and bleeding from the rough fabric. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, she saw hands. Small, dirty hands gripping the rope. Then a head appeared. A boy's head with messy dark hair and wide, frightened eyes. Evelyn grabbed him and pulled him over the edge of the well. They both collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Evelyn sat up and looked at the boy. He was maybe 8 or 9 years old. His clothes were torn and filthy. His face was streaked with dirt and tears. His eyes were huge and dark and full of secrets. "Are you okay?" Evelyn asked gently. "Are you hurt?" The boy stared at her. He didn't answer. He just stared like he couldn't believe she was real. "It's okay," Evelyn said softly. "You're safe now. What's your name?" The boy opened his mouth, but no words came out. He tried again. Nothing. His eyes filled with tears. He couldn't speak. Evelyn's heart broke all over again. She reached out slowly and pulled the boy into her arms. He was so small, so cold, so scared. He buried his face in David's coat and cried. And this time, Evelyn cried too. For the first time since the funeral, tears came. They poured out of her like rain after a drought. She held the boy and rocked him gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay. I've got you. You're not alone anymore." They sat there by the well as the night pressed close around them. 2 broken people holding each other in the darkness. Finally, the boy's crying slowed. He pulled back and looked at Evelyn. His eyes asked 1,000 questions. "Come on," Evelyn said. "Let's get you warm." She helped him stand. He was wobbly and weak. She wrapped David's coat around him and picked up her lantern. Together, they walked back to the broken house. Inside, Evelyn built a fire in the fireplace. It took a while because her hands were shaking, but eventually flames crackled to life. The warmth filled the room like a blessing. She heated more soup and gave it to the boy. He drank it so fast he almost choked. She gave him water. She wrapped him in the only blanket she had brought. The boy sat by the fire and stared at the flames. He still hadn't spoken, but Evelyn didn't push him. She sat beside him and waited. After a long time, the boy reached into his pocket. He pulled out something small and held it out to Evelyn. It was a photograph, old and burned around the edges. In the picture were dozens of children standing in front of a large stone building. They looked happy, smiling. Evelyn's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" The boy pointed to himself in the picture. Then he pointed to the building. His finger trembled. "You live there?" Evelyn asked. The boy nodded. "Where is it?" "That building." The boy pointed toward the forest. Then he made a gesture with his hands. "Flames. Fire. It burned down?" Evelyn whispered. The boy nodded. Tears ran down his cheeks again. Evelyn looked closer at the photograph. At the top, in faded letters, she could read, "St. Mary's Orphanage, 1923. Her heart sank. That was over 100 years ago. But this boy was real, young. How could... The next morning, Evelyn went into the village to search for answers. The boy stayed behind, too frightened to leave the house. She found what was left of the orphanage deep in the forest. Just ruins. Blackened stones covered in moss. Collapsed walls. The forest had swallowed most of it. But in the center, she found a memorial stone. It said, "In memory of the 47 children and 3 teachers who perished in the fire of St. Mary's Orphanage, October 15th, 1923. May their souls rest in peace." 47 children, all dead, all forgotten, except one. When Evelyn returned to the house, the boy was waiting by the window. When he saw her, his face flooded with relief. She sat down beside him. "I found it," she said quietly. "I found where you came from." The boy's eyes filled with pain. "I don't know how you're here," Evelyn continued. "I don't know if you're a ghost or a miracle or something in between. But I know one thing. She took his small hand in hers. "You're not going back into that darkness. You're staying with me, if you want to." The boy looked at her for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. It was the first choice he had made in a very long time. That night, Evelyn made a bed for the boy out of blankets and pillows. She sang him a lullaby her mother used to sing to her. The boy closed his eyes, and for the first time in who knows how long, he slept peacefully. Evelyn watched him breathe. In and out, in and out. She had come to this village to hide from life, to let grief bury her. But life had found her anyway, in the form of a silent boy who needed her. And maybe, just maybe, she needed him too. Outside, the forest whispered. The wind carried voices through the trees. Voices of children laughing, playing, singing. The boy stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake. Evelyn stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the dark forest, and she made a promise. "I'll remember you," she whispered to the ghosts in the trees. "All of you. You won't be forgotten anymore." The wind sighed, and for just a moment, the voices sounded happy. Days turned into weeks. The broken house became a home. Evelyn taught the boy things. How to read from the old books she found in abandoned houses. How to bake bread on the rusty stove. How to plant seeds in the garden she started behind the house. The boy learned fast. He couldn't speak, but his eyes spoke for him. When he smiled, which was rare, it lit up the whole room like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Evelyn named him Samuel. The name meant God has heard. She thought it was perfect for a boy who had cried out from darkness and been answered. Samuel seemed to like the name. He wrote it in the dirt. He traced it on foggy windows. He made it his own. But the nights were still hard. The voices came back. Sometimes they were whispers. Sometimes they were songs. Sometimes they were screams. They came from the well, from the forest, from the ruins of the orphanage. The voices of 47 children who had burned, who had died, who had been forgotten. Samuel would wake up shaking and crying silent tears. Evelyn would hold him and rock him and tell him he was safe. But she knew the truth. The past wasn't finished with them yet. One night, the voices were louder than ever. They filled the house like a flood. Samuel sat up in bed, his eyes wide with terror. He pointed toward the window. Evelyn looked. In the moonlight, she could see them. Shadows moving through the forest. Small shadows. Child-sized shadows. They drifted between the trees like smoke. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They were walking toward the house. Evelyn's heart hammered. She pulled Samuel close. "It's okay," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure it was. The shadows gathered outside. They stood in a circle around the house. Silent. Watching. Waiting. Then one shadow stepped forward. It was small. Younger than Samuel. It lifted a hand and pointed at him. Samuel stood up. His whole body trembled. He looked at Evelyn with eyes full of fear and something else. Something like knowing. "No," Evelyn said firmly. "You're not going with them. You're staying here. With me." But Samuel shook his head. He pointed to his chest, then to the shadows, then to the forest. He was trying to tell her something. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand." Samuel took her hand. He placed it over his heart. She could feel it beating. Real, alive, warm. Then he pointed to the shadows. He made the gesture of flames again. Fire. Death. And Evelyn understood. The other children couldn't move on. They were stuck, trapped between life and death. Forgotten. Alone. But Samuel had been saved. He had been pulled from the darkness. He had been remembered. And now he needed to help the others. "No," Evelyn said again, but her voice broke. "Please, don't leave me. I just found you. I can't lose you, too." Samuel looked at her with eyes older than his years. He touched her face gently. Then he touched his own chest and pointed at her. He was saying, "You'll always be in my heart." Evelyn sobbed. She pulled him into her arms and held him tight. "I love you," she whispered. "Do you understand? I love you like you're my own son." Samuel hugged her back. hard, like he was memorizing the feeling. Then he pulled away. He walked to the door. "Wait," Evelyn said. She grabbed David's coat and wrapped it around Samuel's shoulders. "Take this, so you won't be cold." Samuel looked down at the coat. He buried his face in it for a moment. Then he looked up at Evelyn and smiled. A real smile, a beautiful smile. And he opened his mouth. "Mama," he whispered. It was the first word he had spoken, the only word he needed to speak. Evelyn's heart shattered and healed at the same time. She touched his face one last time. "Go," she whispered. "Go help them. Set them free." Samuel nodded. He turned and walked out into the night. The shadows surrounded him. They reached for him with ghostly hands. But they weren't trying to hurt him. They were holding him, welcoming him. Samuel turned back once and waved. Then he and the shadows walked into the forest. Evelyn stood in the doorway and watched them go. The shadows moved to the trees like a river of light. They walked toward the ruins of the orphanage. And as they walked, they began to sing. It was the most beautiful sound Evelyn had ever heard. Like angels, like hope, like home. The singing grew louder and brighter. Light poured from the forest. A golden, warm, impossible light. Then, one by one, the shadows lifted up. They rose into the sky like stars. Higher and higher, until they disappeared into the heavens. 47 children, finally free, finally home. The forest fell silent. Evelyn sank to her knees and wept. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something bigger, something holy. She had lost David. She had lost Samuel. But she had gained something too. She had learned that love doesn't die. It transforms. It carries on. It lights the way for others. She had learned that even in the darkest well, someone can hear you crying. Someone can pull you back into the light. She had learned that home isn't a place. It's a person, a choice, a moment when two broken hearts decide to beat together. The next morning, Evelyn woke to a strange sound. Laughter. She rushed outside and gasped. The village was different. Flowers bloomed everywhere. In the cracks of stones, through broken windows, along the roadside, red and yellow and purple and white. They covered everything like a blanket of joy. The well in the center of the square was clean. The stones were repaired. Fresh water sparkled inside. And around the well, children played. Real children. Living children. They chased each other and laughed and sang. Their parents stood nearby, smiling and talking. People had come back. The village was alive again. An old woman walked up to Evelyn. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Evelyn asked. "For remembering," the woman said. "For listening. For breaking the curse." "What curse?" The old woman smiled sadly. "This village died the night the orphanage burned. Guilt killed it. We all knew the fire was our fault. We ignored those children. We didn't care for them properly. We let them suffer. So when they died, we couldn't forgive ourselves. We left. We hid. We let the village die with them." She looked at the children playing. "But you came. You listened. You saved the last one. And in saving him, you freed them all. You freed us too." Evelyn looked around at the blooming flowers, at the laughing children, at the healing village. "Will he come back?" she whispered. "Samuel?" The old woman smiled. "He already has. Look." She pointed to the garden behind Evelyn's house. In the center, a small tree had grown overnight. It was strong and green and covered in white blossoms. Carved into the trunk were 3 words. "Thank you, Mama." Evelyn touched the bark. It was warm, alive, real. Samuel was still here, in the tree, in the flowers, in the healing, in the love that had transformed death into life. She had come to this village to disappear, to hide from the pain of living. But life had found her anyway, in the sound of crying in the darkness, in the small hand of frightened boy, in the choice to care when caring hurt. And now she understood. The sounds that once terrified her, the crying, the whispers, the voices in the dark, they weren't curses. They were calls, invitations, chances to love again. Home wasn't a place she had lost. It was something she carried, something she could give, something that grew every time she chose to listen with her heart. Evelyn sat under Samuel's tree and smiled. For the first time in forever, she felt peace. The village grew around her. Children played. Flowers bloomed. Life continued. And in the branches above her head, the wind whispered a sound that no human being forgets. The sound of a child saying, "I love you." The sound of forgiveness. The sound of home. If this story touched your heart, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so you never miss another tale of love, loss, and miraculous healing. Because sometimes the whispers in the dark aren't meant to scare us. They're meant to lead us home. Thank you for reading, and remember, listen with your heart, and even the broken places can bloom again.